I'll tell you how it ends first. I was sitting at a corner table at Aurelio's, the Italian place on Marsh Street with the low amber lighting and the candles that drip wax onto the tablecloth, and Carol was across from me, closing a leather portfolio, and she said, "It's done." I ordered a glass of the Barolo I'd been saving the occasion for. I didn't toast anything. I just drank it slowly and thought about a Tuesday morning 8 weeks earlier when my wife opened her banking app in the parking lot of her office building and watched a number she thought was hers disappear. She called it a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. I'd been planning it since the Thursday she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter and forgot, just for a moment, who she was married to. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 38 years old, and I am a cybersecurity analyst for a mid-sized financial firm called Vantage Capital Partners, where I spend the better part of each workday doing one thing with precision and patience: finding data that people are absolutely certain no longer exists. Deleted files, scrubbed metadata, encrypted threads on apps designed specifically to leave no trace. I find them. I reconstruct them. I present them in formats that hold up in federal compliance audits, and occasionally in court. I am not loud. I don't raise my voice in meetings. My colleagues describe me as methodical. My boss once told a client I was the quietest, dangerous person he'd ever hired, and he meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one. My wife, Diana, had been hiding things from me for 7 months. She had chosen, of all the people available to her in the world, to hide secrets from the one person whose entire professional existence is built on the understanding that nothing is ever truly hidden, only buried. And buried things have a way of surfacing for me. I spend 8 hours a day finding data people swear doesn't exist. Diana forgot that.
Diana and I had been married for 9 years when it fell apart. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party in our late 20s. She was wearing a green dress and laughing at something across the room when I first saw her, and I remember thinking she was the most alive person in any space she occupied. That quality never left her. It was one of the things I loved most. It became, eventually, one of the things that should have told me something. We built what looked like a solid life, a craftsman house on Delmore Street with a porch we never used enough, 2 incomes, a dog named Biscuit, a shared calendar full of dinner reservations and weekend plans. Diana was a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech firm, social, sharp, always the most charming person in any room she walked into, always with her phone in her hand. I never thought anything of the phone. That was her world: content, campaigns, constant connectivity. The last year, I can see now, was a slow dimming. She started working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays in patterns that, had I been paying the kind of attention I pay at work, I would have flagged immediately as irregular. She acquired a second phone, a sleek black one she described as a work device her company had issued. She kept it face down on the nightstand. I didn't ask about it. I trusted her the way you trust someone after 9 years of building something together. She seemed elsewhere on our anniversary trip to the coast. She laughed at the right moments over dinner, but her eyes were somewhere I couldn't find. I told myself it was stress. I told myself everyone goes through distance. Looking back, the signs weren't hidden. I just hadn't decided to look yet. It was a Thursday in late October, 4:17 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I checked my watch when I pulled into the driveway, calculating whether I had enough time to start dinner before Diana got home.
A client meeting had ended 40 minutes early, and I'd driven back through the kind of flat, gray afternoon light that makes everything look like it's waiting for something. Diana's car wasn't there. I let myself in through the side door, dropped my bag on the bench, and walked into the kitchen. Her personal laptop, not the black work device, her silver personal MacBook, was open on the kitchen counter, screen still lit. She'd left in a hurry that morning. I remembered her searching for her keys while her coffee went cold. She'd forgotten to close it. I wasn't going to look. I want to be clear about that. I was walking past it toward the refrigerator when the screen caught my eye, a notification banner sliding across the top of the display from an app I didn't recognize, a messaging platform. The icon was a small gray lock. The preview showed 4 words beneath an unfamiliar name. I won't repeat them here. I stood very still for a moment. Then I pulled out the chair, sat down in front of the laptop, and did not touch a single key. I didn't need to. I reached for my own work laptop from my bag, connected to our home router through my admin credentials, a network I had built and configured myself 3 years earlier for what I'd told Diana was security monitoring, and began pulling the device activity logs. What I found in the next 40 minutes was methodical and merciless in the way that only data can be. Timestamps, connection histories, duration logs. The encrypted app had been accessed from Diana's personal device an average of 11 times per day for the past 7 months. The app itself was linked to a cloud backup account, a permission sync she had enabled automatically when she set up her new phone and almost certainly forgotten about. Through that sync, the backup was accessible. I accessed it. I read everything. 219 days of messages.
I read them in 38 minutes, the way I read everything, linearly, completely, without flinching, cataloging as I went. There was a name. There were hotel names. There were dates I recognized as dates Diana had told me she was somewhere else entirely. When I finished, I closed both laptops. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, I don't know why. Then I checked the refrigerator, found the ingredients I needed, and started the pasta. Diana came home at 6:45. She smelled like cold air and the specific floral perfume she'd been wearing for the past year, a new one she'd switched to without explanation. She set her bag down and leaned against the doorframe of the kitchen, watching me stir the sauce. "Smells good," she said. I smiled. I poured her a glass of the white wine she liked. I asked about her day. I read 14 weeks of messages in 38 minutes. Then I put the pasta on. She told me about a campaign meeting that had run long. She laughed once at something her colleague had said. She topped up her wine and set the table without being asked. I listened to every word she said. I did not hear a single one. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was devastated, or not only because of that, but because my mind had already shifted into the mode it defaults to under pressure. Analytical, sequential. What do I know? What do I need? What is the correct order of operations? Diana slept beside me with the particular stillness of someone with a clear conscience, or a very practiced one. I lay on my back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and made a list in my head. By 5 a.m. I had decided 3 things. I would tell exactly one person. I would call an attorney before noon. And I would not change a single visible thing about my behavior until I was told to. At 6:30, while Diana was in the shower, I sent my sister Renee a text that said only, "Call me when you're alone."
Renee called at 7:52 from her car in the parking lot of her school where she teaches 8th grade English. I told her in 11 minutes, flatly and without editorializing. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Marcus, what do you need?" That was all she said. That is why she was the only person I told. I got to the office at 8:45, closed my door, and spent 20 minutes researching family law attorneys in the county with specific experience in asset protection and financial misconduct cases. I identified 3. I called the first one at 9:15 and left a message. I called the second at 9:18. Her name was Carol Vass. She answered herself. I had an appointment at 1 p.m. that same day. Carol's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, clean-lined and deliberately calm, the kind of space designed to make frightened people feel like someone has a plan. She was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, with the unhurried precision of someone who had sat across from a great deal of human wreckage and remained undisturbed by all of it. She listened to me for 20 minutes without writing anything down. Then she picked up her pen. She told me the most important thing I could do right now was nothing visible. No confrontations, no altered behavior, no moved money, no changed passwords. "Don't move a dollar and don't change a word," she said. I said, "I haven't moved anything in 9 years. I can wait a little longer." She looked at me for a moment over her glasses. Then she wrote something down and told me what to bring her. Over the following week, I moved through our house quietly and systematically. Joint account statements, investment portfolios, the mortgage documents in the filing cabinet in the spare room, Diana's business expense binders she kept on the shelf above her desk. I photographed everything with my phone, transferred the images each evening to an encrypted folder on an air-gapped drive that I kept in my work bag and that never once touched our home network. Diana noticed nothing. She was busy. She had places to be. The 6 weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. From the outside,
Nothing changed. I drove the same route to work. I made dinner on the nights it was my turn. I watched television beside Diana on the couch on Friday evenings with biscuit between us. And when she laughed at something on screen, I made the appropriate sounds. I was present in every way that could be observed, and absent in every way that mattered. It was not difficult. That is the part I am not proud of, how easy it was to maintain. Underneath that stillness, I was building something. Carol had given me a framework, and I worked within it the way I work within any technical architecture, methodically, without shortcuts, double-checking every connection before moving to the next. The first thing I did was go back through 18 months of joint account statements, printed and spread across my desk at the office on 3 consecutive late evenings after everyone else had gone home. The door was closed. The building was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional elevator. What I found in those statements was not subtle once I knew what I was looking for. 41 separate transfers from our joint checking account over 14 months, amounts between $200 and $800, never round numbers, always spaced irregularly, the specific pattern of someone who understood that round numbers and regular intervals trigger fraud alerts. The transfers went to an account I didn't recognize. In total, $14,200 and change. I cross-referenced the dates against Diana's calendar, which she shared with me for scheduling purposes and had never thought to unshare. Hotel names. A weekend in March she told me was a work retreat in the city.
A long weekend in June, she said, was a bachelorette trip for a colleague I had never met and now strongly suspected did not exist in the capacity described. I documented everything in a format Carol had specified: date, amount, cross-reference, source document. Clean, court-ready. In the third week, Carol recommended a private investigator. His name was Paul Garrett, former insurance fraud investigator, recommended by Carol's office specifically because his documentation methodology had been accepted in family court proceedings 43 times without a single successful challenge. I met him once, in a coffee shop near the courthouse, over Americanos neither of us touched. He had the affect of a man who had heard every version of every story and found none of them surprising. I told him what I needed. He told me his rate and his timeline. 2 weeks. A legally admissible activity log. I said, fine. During the 4th week, I did something that required a different kind of care. I approached my firm's in-house financial compliance officer, a careful, incurious man named Gerald who owed me a professional favor from a data recovery situation 2 years prior, and posed what I described as a hypothetical question about asset protection in cases of undisclosed spousal transfers. Gerald answered my hypothetical thoroughly and without curiosity. I left that conversation understanding precisely which of our joint accounts I had unilateral legal authority to act on, under what circumstances, and within what timeframes. That same week, following Carol's instruction, I opened a personal checking account at a different bank entirely and redirected my direct deposit there. The change processed quietly on a Thursday. Diana never looked at my pay stubs. She bought me a birthday card in week 5. She left it propped against the coffee maker so I'd find it in the morning. It had a lighthouse on the front. Inside she'd written, "To the person who always finds his way. Love, D."
I read it twice. I thanked her warmly. I put it on the shelf in my office at home, where it stood for the remaining weeks between us like a small flag planted on territory she didn't realize she'd already lost. The folder grew. Every receipt she didn't think I'd find became a page in a document she'd eventually have to sit across from in a courtroom. Paul Garrett delivered his report on a Friday afternoon, emailed in an encrypted file with a password Carol's office had prearranged. I opened it at my desk, read it in full, and then sat for a moment looking out the window at the city below. He had given me names, dates, locations confirmed, and one detail I had not expected. The name in Paul Garrett's report was Derek Ashford. I sat with that name for a long moment before it fully landed. Then it landed completely. Derek Ashford was not a stranger. He was Diana's professional mentor, her words, from 3 years ago when she'd first mentioned him, a senior director at a partner firm who had taken an interest in her career trajectory. I had met Derek Ashford at 3 separate company events. I had stood beside him at the industry mixer at the Harlow Hotel in February and listened to him talk about the commercial real estate market for 20 minutes while Diana circulated the room. I had shaken his hand at the Vantage Partners holiday reception in December, and he had gripped it firmly and looked me in the eye and told me I was a lucky guy. He had attended our housewarming party 4 years ago. He had stood in my kitchen. He had eaten food I cooked. He had held a glass of wine I poured.
I sat Paul's report down on my desk and looked at the wall. That was the first thing. The second thing was worse. Buried in the financial cross-referencing section of Paul's report, a section I almost skimmed because I thought I already knew what it contained, was a notation about account beneficiary records.
Diana had opened 2 accounts I had no knowledge of, a personal savings account and a small investment vehicle, both opened 14 months ago. On both of them, listed as emergency contact and secondary beneficiary, was Derek Ashford. In our state, that designation carries legal weight. It is not a casual field to fill in. It is the kind of field you fill in when you are making a plan. This had not been only an affair. Diana had been slowly, quietly, methodically repositioning assets with Derek Ashford in mind. While I was photographing her financial documents and cross-referencing her calendar, she had been constructing a parallel architecture, a second life with a financial skeleton already in place. She had been patient about it. 14 months of patience. I thought about the lighthouse card on my shelf. To the person who always finds his way. I closed Paul's report. I saved it to the encrypted drive. I put on my jacket, took the elevator to the parking garage, and sat in my car on level 3 in the yellow-gray fluorescent light with the engine off. I want to be honest about what happened in those 11 minutes, because I said at the beginning that I would tell this truthfully. I didn't cry, but something moved through me that I don't have a cleaner word for than grief. Not for the affair. I had processed the affair over 6 weeks of quiet dinners and lighthouse cards and biscuits sleeping at the foot of our bed. What moved through me in that parking garage was grief for the specific version of my life I had believed in most completely. The housewarming party, the coast trip, the way she had laughed across a room in a green dress, and I had thought, that one. 14 months. She had been building an exit for 14 months, while I had been building a marriage. I sat with that for 11 minutes. I allowed it to exist. I did not perform anything for anyone, because there was no one there. Then I picked up my phone and called Carol.
She answered on the second ring. I said, "I need you to accelerate the timeline." A pause, the sound of her setting something down on her desk. "How soon?" she said. I looked at the concrete wall in front of my car, level 3, a yellow painted number and a flickering light, and the distant sound of a car somewhere below. "As soon as it's airtight," I said. "It already is," Carol said. I started the engine. I drove home. Diana was making tea in the kitchen when I walked in, the kettle just beginning to steam, the kitchen smelling of chamomile and the cedar candle she kept on the windowsill. She looked up and smiled and asked if I wanted a cup. I'd shaken that man's hand. He'd stood in my kitchen, and for 7 months, he'd been the reason my wife was lying to my face. "Sure," I said. She turned back to the kettle. I hung up my jacket and set my bag down and waited. It happened on a Tuesday. Carol had chosen the day deliberately. Tuesday mornings, based on the calendar Diana still shared with me, were her standing team meetings, 9 to 11, conference room B, the whole department present. She would be visible. She would be surrounded by colleagues. She would have nowhere to go and no way to compose herself before people were watching. I went to work as usual, gray merino sweater, the one Diana had given me 2 Christmases ago. I ordered my usual Americano from the cart in the lobby. I was at my desk by 8:30, and I did what I do every morning. Opened my systems, ran my checks, settled into the clean and ordered world of data that has never once lied to me. At 10:14 a.m., Paul Jarrett sent me a single text message. It said, "Confirmed." That was all. We had prearranged the signal. It meant the process server had made contact. I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. What I learned later, from Carol, who had spoken to the process server directly, was that Diana had been mid-sentence when he walked into the conference room, presenting campaign metrics to her team on the wall screen, clicker in hand, in the middle of a sentence about Q4 projections. He had asked for her by full name. She had said yes. He had handed her the envelope and left without another word. She had stood there holding it for a moment, with 2 colleagues watching, before she stepped out of the room. Within the hour, she opened her banking app. The joint account, the one Carol had identified as falling within the legal parameters for restructuring pending proceedings, showed a balance she had not expected to find. The freeze had executed at 10:02 a.m., 12 minutes before the process server arrived, in the precise window Carol had spent 2 weeks confirming was unassailable. My phone rang at 11:09, then 11:14, then 11:22, 11:31, 11:47. I let them go to voicemail. She called a 6th time at 12:03. I was eating lunch at my desk, a sandwich I had made that morning, the same turkey and mustard on sourdough I make every Tuesday. I looked at the phone. I picked it up. Marcus. Her voice was not the voice I knew. It was stripped of the warmth and the charm and the easy confidence. What was underneath those things was something rawer. What did you do? What is this? I said nothing. This is insane. You can't just... This is our account, Marcus. You can't do this without talking to me. This is insane. Diana. She stopped. You have an attorney's number on those papers. I'd call it. I don't want an attorney. I want to know what you think you're... We're done. Silence. The particular quality the silence that follows something that cannot be unsaid. Then her voice changed again. The rawness hardened into something else. The tone I had heard directed at other people over 9 years, but never at me. Contemptuous. Cold. You think this makes you look good, she said. Ambushing me at work like this. Freezing accounts like some kind of... This is unhinged, Marcus. This is controlling and unhinged, and my attorney is going to...
She said I ambushed her, I told Carol later that afternoon, sitting in the clean-lined calm of her 14th floor office. She used that word specifically. Carol looked at me over her glasses. What did you say? I said, no, an ambush is a surprise. I gave you 7 months of dinners, and you never noticed. Carol wrote something down. Then she slid a copy of Diana's hastily filed attorney response across the desk toward me. It had arrived, she said, at 2:45 p.m. Diana had hired someone by early afternoon, a family law attorney whose firm Carol knew well and whose opening position she described as optimistic given the circumstances. Carol's response had already been prepared for 3 days. It went out at 3 p.m. and contained the complete evidence package, the router logs, the message metadata, the 18 months of transfer records, the PI report with Paul Garrett's legally admissible activity documentation, and the beneficiary repositioning records on both accounts. Diana's attorney called Carol's office the following morning at 9:47. He advised his client to consider settlement terms. Carol called me at 10:15 and told me. I was at my desk. I looked out the window at the city and said nothing for a moment. Marcus, Carol said. I heard you, I said. It's almost over. I looked at the city. Gray November sky. The coffee on my desk had gone cold. Okay, I said. Marcus and Diana had no children, but 3 weeks after the papers were served, my sister Renee called and asked if I would come to Sunday dinner. I said yes because she asked, and because I had been eating alone for 3 weeks, and because Biscuit had started sleeping in the middle of the bed, and I found I couldn't move him. Renee made her lamb stew, the one with the rosemary and the pearl onions that takes 4 hours, and that she only makes when she is trying to say something she doesn't have words for yet. Her husband Carl made himself scarce after dinner, with the particular tact of a good man who understands when he is not needed. And then it was just me and Renee and her daughter Priya at the kitchen table, with the remnants of dinner between us, and the low light of the overhead fixture that Renee has been meaning to replace for 2 years. Priya is 17. She has her mother's directness and her father's patience, which is a rare and formidable combination. She had known Diana her whole life. Diana had taken her shopping for her first formal dress. Diana had attended her choir recitals and remembered her favorite ice cream flavor, and texted her on her birthday every year without fail. I knew this. I had always known this. It was one of the things I had genuinely loved about my wife, the ease with which she made people feel seen. Priya had been quiet through most of dinner. Now she looked at me across the table with the particular anger than is comfortable. Uncle Marcus, she said, can I ask you something? Yes. She folded her hands. Why couldn't you just talk to her? Renee made a small sound. I shook my head slightly at her. It was a fair question. It deserved a fair answer. I was quiet for a moment, looking at Priya's face, the seriousness of it, the genuine distress underneath the directness, and I thought about how to say something true without saying more than she needed to carry. I thought about it, I said. I thought about walking into the kitchen one of those evenings and just putting it on the table, everything I knew, and asking her to explain it.
Why didn't you? I looked at my hands, because I already knew what she would say. And I knew what I would do if she said it. I would have believed her.
Or I would have wanted to badly enough that it would have amounted to the same thing, and then I would have spent another year in something that was already gone. I paused. Some things, once broken, can't be argued back into shape. You can have the conversation, but the shape doesn't come back. Priya was quiet for a moment. Renee was very still. "Are you okay?" Priya said. Just that, straight across the table, no preamble. Something about the simplicity of it, the uncomplicated directness of a 17-year-old asking a question that none of the adults in my life had asked quite so plainly, did something I hadn't anticipated. I felt it move through me, the way things only move through you when your defenses are down and you're sitting in a kitchen that smells like rosemary and you haven't been sleeping enough for 3 weeks. "I'm getting there," I said, which was the most honest thing I had said out loud in 2 months. Priya nodded slowly. Then she looked at me with the expression that I would think about later, driving home. A kind of careful, considered gravity that was older than 17 and kinder than I deserved in that moment. "She still loves you, you know," Priya said quietly. "Aunt Diana, I'm not saying that I'm not taking her side. I just think she does, in whatever way she's capable of." I looked at her for a long moment. "I know," I said. "I think I know that. It just turned out not to be enough." Priya was quiet again. Then she pushed back her chair and came around the table and put her arms around my shoulders from behind, her chin at the top of my head, the way she used to hug me when she was small, and I was the uncle who fixed her bicycle and explained how computers worked. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my shoulder. She asked me, quietly above my head, "Were you ever going to tell her you knew?" I looked at Renee's kitchen wall. The old clock.
The photograph of Priya at 8 years old on the refrigerator, gap-toothed and squinting into the sun. "I told her every single day," I said. "She just wasn't listening to that part of me." Priya held on for another moment. Then she straightened up and went back to her chair and picked up her fork and said, with the effortful normalcy of someone changing the subject on purpose, "Do you want the last of the stew?" I said yes. Renee refilled my bowl without being asked and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. The settlement was reached on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of December, 41 days after the papers were served. There was no trial. Diana's attorney, whose optimistic opening position had weathered approximately 72 hours of contact with Carol's evidence package before quietly deflating, had moved his client toward negotiation with a speed that Carol described with professional understatement as pragmatic. Diana had hired him in a panic on a Tuesday afternoon. By the following Thursday, he was already counseling realism. I was not in the room for most of it. Carol handled the negotiations with the methodical patience of someone who has done this many times and understands that the most powerful thing a well-prepared attorney can do is simply wait. She called me with updates in evenings, concise and clear, and I listened and said very little and trusted her completely, which is the only way to work with someone good at their job. The final terms were not what Diana had hoped for. I retained the house on Delmore Street. I retained the primary joint investment accounts, which represented the majority of what we had built together financially over 9 years. The $14,200 in undisclosed transfers, documented to the cent across 41 transactions, cross-referenced to hotel bookings and gifts and a coastal weekend I was never told about, was returned to me as part of the settlement figure, with an additional sum that Carol had negotiated based on the beneficiary repositioning evidence. Diana retained her personal accounts, her car, her professional wardrobe, and the kitchen table she had picked out herself 7 years ago from an antique market on Route 9. She did not retain Derek Ashford. This I learned not from Carol but from Renee, who heard it through the particular informal intelligence network of mutual acquaintances that operates in the aftermath of every divorce. Once the documentation had become part of formal legal proceedings, once Derek's name appeared in filed court records alongside words like undisclosed beneficiary and financial repositioning, he had quietly and completely withdrawn. No explanation offered to Diana as far as anyone knew. No conversation. Simply an absence where a plan had been. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard this. I want to be accurate about that.
What I felt was something closer to a tired recognition. The understanding that Diana had restructured her life around a man who, when the architecture became visible and the costs became real, had simply walked away from the blueprints. There were professional consequences too, quieter and slower moving. The circumstances around the process serving, the conference room, the colleagues present, the abrupt departure mid-presentation, had filtered through Diana's office in the way these things do, regardless of anyone's intentions. HR had become peripherally aware. Her position did not disappear, but the quality of the air around it changed in ways that, I was told, were noticeable. I did not engineer any of that. I want to be clear.
It was simply the nature of things that have been kept in the dark. When they come into the light falls where it falls. On the morning of the final signing, I drove downtown in the early gray cold, parked in the same garage where I had sat on level 311 weeks earlier, and took the elevator to Carol's office. She had coffee waiting, black, the way she'd noted I took it at our first meeting 4 months ago. We sat across from each other at her conference table, and I read every page of the final document with the same attention I gave everything, and then I signed my name 11 times, in the places marked with small yellow flags. Carol collected the pages. She aligned them against the table with a neat tap and slid them into a folder. "It's done," she said. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and brief and entirely professional, which I appreciated. I walked back to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, stood in the small mirrored box of it as the floors descended, and looked at my own reflection, gray merino, the same one, the one Diana had given me, and thought about nothing in particular. Outside the building, the December air was sharp and clean. I turned up my collar and walked my car by a different route than usual, through the small park on Clemens Street where the trees had dropped everything and stood bare and uncomplicated against the white sky. The judge didn't need to say much. The documents said everything I'd spent 9 years not saying out loud. I drove home. Biscuit was at the door. It is late August now. 10 months since a Thursday afternoon in October when I walked into my kitchen and a screen that should have been dark was still lit. The house on Delmer Street is different in small ways that have accumulated into something that feels, on most mornings, like mine. I repainted the front room in January, a warm off-white that Diana had always vetoed in favor of the gray she'd chosen when we moved in. I replaced the kitchen counter light fixture with something warmer. I put a reading chair on the porch we never used enough, and I have used it most evenings since April when the weather turned, with a book and whatever is left of my coffee, and Biscuit arranged across my feet like a small, inerrant blanket. I got a second dog in March. Her name is Ada. She is a 3-year-old rescue beagle with one slightly bent ear and the absolute moral certainty that every object on every surface belongs to her. She and Biscuit have reached an accord that I find genuinely moving. They sleep in a pile at the foot of the bed. I have stopped noticing the middle of the mattress. I still work in cybersecurity. I still find things people are certain no longer exist. I am still quiet. My colleagues still describe me as methodical. Nothing about the way I move through a workday has changed, which I take as either a sign of stability or a failure of imagination, and on good days, I can tell the difference. Renee calls every Sunday. Priya got into her first choice university and starts in the fall. I sent her a card with a lighthouse on the front, deliberately, privately, with a feeling that was not quite irony and not quite something else. And inside I wrote only, "Go find your way. Love, Uncle M." She texted me a photograph of it on her desk. I don't think about Diana often. When I do, it is not with anger. Anger requires a kind of ongoing investment I discontinued some time ago. What I think about, occasionally, in the specific way you think about things that no longer have the power to move you, but have not entirely lost their shape, is the version of a life I believed in for 9 years. The Craftsman house, the shared calendar, a green dress across a room. I think about it the way you think about a place you lived once and no longer live, with a recognition that it was real, that you were there, and that you are somewhere else now.
I was sitting on the porch last Thursday evening with Ada on my feet and a glass of the Barolo, and the particular quality of late summer light that makes everything look like it is finished being one thing and about to become another. And I thought, this is enough. Not as a consolation, as a fact. I am not going to tell you that what Diana did was unimportant. It was not unimportant. I am not going to tell you that 9 years is nothing, or that what I built and what was taken from it didn't cost me something real. It did. Some mornings it still does, briefly, before the coffee is ready and Ada is demanding her breakfast,
and the day assembles itself into the shape of a life that belongs entirely to me. What I will tell you is this, and this is the thing I have said only to Renee, only once, sitting at her kitchen table over the remnants of the lamb stew. The opposite of betrayal is not revenge, it is clarity. She thought silence meant I didn't know. It meant I was already finished. I finished my wine. The light went low and gold across the porch, and Ada lifted her head and looked at me with her one bent ear and her complete and uncomplicated certainty that everything was fine. I told her she was right.